Okay, let's start. Good morning and good afternoon. Let's begin with quick technical notes on the use of Zoom platform. All the participants in the meeting are automatically muted. Only the speakers can turn on their mics when their turn is on. We have English and French interpretation, so if you are not comfortable with both languages, please choose your preferred language. Just click on the small globe icon below and choose your preferred language. The chat box is available for us to communicate among each other, so please feel free to use it. And lastly, this meeting is being recorded, so I hope now everyone is feeling comfortable. Let's start. Virginia, please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Amar. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Prajina Strauss, and I represent the Regional Office for Africa of UN Habitat. Today's session on the topic of urban resilience in member states of the Southern African Development Community, or SADC, promises to be very engaging, as we are fortunate to have a panel of distinguished speakers who all have unique insights on the issue. Before we dive into the discussion, I would like to start with a brief presentation to provide a background for today's event. Since 2018, UN Habitat has been partnering with the World Bank, SADC, and the Technical Center for Disaster Risk Management, Sustainability and Urban Resilience, otherwise known as DIMSUR, to implement an initiative that is aimed at building the resilience of urban areas in the 16 SADC member states. The work that is the basis and inspiration for our discussion today is made possible by funding from the ACP-EU, managed by GFDRR, the World Bank. UN Habitat's assignment within this program over the past 2 years has two main components. On the one hand, the normative part is a research piece, culminating in a report on urban vulnerability and resilience in the SADC region. On the other hand, the more practical component has been the implementation of a participatory planning methodology through a tool that we call the City Resilience Action Planning Tool, or CityRAP. In this presentation, I will quickly summarize some of the main findings of the research that is captured in the Regional Assessment Report. This will be published in early 2021, and some of the key takeaways from implementing CityRAP in cities of the SADC region. A more detailed analysis of all of these outcomes is articulated in a discussion paper that was prepared as input to today's session and which is available to you. We will put it in the chat box. So let's dive in. We could have the presentation, please. So the Regional Assessment Report is based on desk research, analysis of maps, risk profiling, and data collected from surveys conducted with all 16 SADC member states and the SADC DRR unit. It drills down into 4 levels, from the global to the city, with emphasis on the SADC regional level. I will try to quickly convey some of the findings. Next slide. At the crux of the regional assessment are the triple occurrences of rapid and uncontrolled urbanization, worsening effects of climate change, and existing socioeconomic vulnerabilities, coupled with the fact that the region is highly prone to hazards such as cyclones, floods, and droughts. This makes for an enormous challenge, which must be addressed at all levels from the local to the regional. The data on urbanization also shows an interesting trend. Urbanization in Africa has two distinct tracks. On the one hand, we are seeing the blossoming of megacities such as Dar es Salaam and Luanda. And on the other hand, we see that the majority of the region's urban population live in smaller secondary cities, which are taking on increasing importance as shifting populations from megacities to secondary cities comes with many socioeconomic benefits. That said, addressing the urban resilience needs of megacities versus smaller secondary cities cannot be handled the same way. What is common, however, is that if urbanization is left unplanned, urbanization is jeopardized. Next slide. As you can see from this slide, another important point is that since most natural hazards are transboundary, the case for inter-country cooperation is well evidenced. It is essential that countries and cities that share the same hazards, for example, the cluster of coastal and island states that are visited by cyclones annually, share information, knowledge, experiences, and coordinate and cooperate at the policy and strategic levels as well. This is not only limited to reducing disaster risk, but also to addressing the root causes of the climate change effects that are intensifying hazards and working towards longer-term urban resilience. Next slide. There is an entire chapter of the regional assessment report dedicated to institutional and policy analysis focused on the SADC regional level, but housed within the global framework and with consideration to the need for integrating the national and city level plans and strategies as well. The main message here is that a lot of the groundwork has already been laid. There are regional, national, and city mechanisms in place, but there are still many gaps and weaknesses, especially relating to vertical coordination between levels of governance and thematic silos that have not yet achieved a cross-cutting approach to DRR and climate change. Next slide. The key findings of the report are divided into these 6 main areas, which you see on the screen. There's a lot to unpack, and the discussion paper and the final version of the report do so. There you can find additional details and examples for all these dimensions and the recommendations that flow from them. A lot of these areas will also be touched upon in our discussion today. Next slide. So I can talk about CityRap for days, but I only have a few seconds left. So let me emphasize that this is a tool designed particularly for small and intermediate sized cities, and it brings together city leadership and communities to enable them to identify the city's key resilience building needs together. The outcome is an easily fundable and executable plan. We have already tested and implemented CityRap in 34 locations in 12 African countries. And through this initiative, we covered 8 cities. For example, the city of Mutara, whose town clerk is with us today. We have learned a lot from CityRap implementation, both about participatory resilience planning and about some of the key trends related to urban resilience in the region. But in general, our observations from the CityRap experience have reinforced our research findings articulated in the regional assessment. Next slide. And then, of course, we get to COVID, the enormous shock that has rattled our existence this year. While the pandemic has created a dangerous multi-tiered risk scenario in the region and put cities at its epicenter, we also see a silver lining. COVID-19 highlights the same existing gaps that the regional assessment identified. If these gaps are tackled as a result of COVID, it would also build resilience to other hazards. Hopefully, we can use the coronavirus experience to motivate further African cities to holistically tackle their vulnerabilities, innovate, and transform to greener, safer, more prosperous, and more resilient urban areas. Next slide. In conclusion, we have produced a solid evidence base from our research and practical work with cities that makes a strong claim for learning from homegrown best practices for urban resilience building at different city scales, and for a coordinated multi-country approach that encapsulates and goes beyond local, national, and sectoral boundaries. As you can see on the screen, these 3 points are the aims of this session and the points that we are going to ask our speakers to concentrate on. So thank you for bearing with me. This was just a glimpse into our work that we would like to share with you in more detail through our forthcoming report. Our speakers today will reflect on some of the key issues raised and provide you with a more direct view into these opportunities and challenges in the region. And now let's jump into our discussion. Please allow me to introduce our moderator, my colleague at UN Habitat, and the brains behind much of this work, Mr. Matias Faliviero. Matias, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Frugina. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So I'll be the moderator, and I would like to ask each speaker to fit to the 7 minutes each for this first session of dialogue with the mayors and the city leaders on innovation for building urban resilience. So my first question is to Ms. Mourdine Siti Farouata, Governor of the Grand Comore Island of the Union of Comoros. Ms. Farouata, can you please, you know that climate change and urbanization are closely interlinked and can manifest in both positive and negative outcomes. How can cities leverage their strength to adapt more effectively to climate change and prevent disasters? Can you please share some lessons learned from Grand Comore Island, which faces a very particular set of hazards and vulnerabilities? Ms. Farouata, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, de me donner la parole.
Thank you, moderator, for giving me the floor.
I am pleased and honored to participate today at this regional forum to discuss such a crucial topic regarding concerning cities. I take this opportunity to warmly greet my colleagues from Mozambique, Malawi, and Madagascar, as well as our partners from UN Habitat with TIMSU and SADC that have left no stone unturned to strengthen the resilience of our cities when tackling disasters and climate change. Before I get into the crux of the matter, allow me to give you an overview of the issue of resilience in our city, Moroni. The capital is addressing the challenge of climate change. The city of Moroni has to deal with an unplanned rapid growth of the population that enhances significantly the vulnerability to climate change and disaster risk. Its population has more than tripled over the last 30 years, and Moroni is facing a massive and unplanned rural exodus in the absence of a real urban planning strategy. To that is the lack of adequate planning of proper infrastructure to deal with this population growth, as well as management of waste, drains, and supply of clean water. We can also note that the city of Moroni is highly exposed to coastal erosion and cyclone impacts enhanced by the effect of climate change. It is constantly exposed to the effects of the Kartala volcano, which is still active, and eruptions can lead to massive disruptions of socioeconomic activities of the cities. The early eruptions swallowed over 40% of the land area of the capital, and this was due to the lava flow. However, there is a positive side to the story. The city has a major asset in terms of organization related to the dense and well-developed social fabric around neighborhoods and villages. The intervening structures in the area of adaptation, waste management, improving drainage and reforestation, and replanning of streets to facilitate mobility, access, and creation of public space for leisure, and the construction of cultural centers for leisure. On this latter point, I want to share with you the experience of the engagement of my community on urban resilience. Indeed, the unplanned development of the city and the lack of planning resulted in problems of access in the neighborhood because of the absence of smaller roads and the degradation of these roads. To address this lack of intervention by the various public services, the communities organize themselves into associations, development associations in their respective neighborhoods to have development projects and to strengthen resilience, particularly. Many of these initiatives focused on development of roads and smaller roads to facilitate access, but also to improve the drainage of rainwater. Various forms of fundraising can be organized in the respective neighborhoods. Generally speaking, in the form of cultural manifestations and collection of grants and donations. This can be done, and this can be achieved through awareness raising by the community, targeting its community members and various socio-professional categories that are operating in the respective neighborhoods of the city. The funds thus collected are earmarked for the purchase of equipment, labor, and expertise provided willingly on a voluntary basis by the members of the community. However, the achievement of these various infrastructure produced results contrary to what was expected because their design and construction did not factor in water drainage, the lack of appropriate expertise, feasibility study, and monitoring of implementation. We also have the planning and implementation of dikes that were affected by some climate effects. I would have also loved through this discussion to have a workshop that will permit us to take advantage of our shared experience and lessons learned. Now, while being understood that the policies are in the Comoro Immersion Strategy initiated by the President of Comoros, this is an innovative project that is part of city resilience. I thank you for your attention.
Keeping the time and for explaining the multiple challenges faced by Grand Comore, but also, as you said, some of the opportunities based on community solidarity and a great work on resilience building. Let me now pass to the next speaker, Mr. Joshua Maligwa, who is the town clerk for the city of Mutare in Zimbabwe. Mr. Maligwa, how has the city of Mutare succeeded in improving the coping capacity of local populations through participation, awareness raising, training, and education? What step have you taken to build your city's resilience in a participatory manner? Mr. Maligwa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A good welcome from Mutare City Council. If we can have if we can share the screen, please, from our technical guys. Ismail, if we can share the screen so that we can start the ball rolling. Thank you. Thank you very much.
They're coming, yes.
Yes, yes. First screen, let's go to, that's the first screen. Let's go to the next, that's the framework, yes, the introduction. City of Mutare is lucky to be part of the CityRap approach process, As we heard, the CityRap process is a participatory resilience planning process where the city engages its residents to deal with issues to do with disaster and sustainable issues within the city. So through the CityRap tool developed by the UN and the Technical Center for Disaster Resilience Management, Sustainable and Urban Resilience, Mutare has crafted a resilience framework of action, which is called an RFA. And the resilience framework for action is set of a priority areas and action plans to be implemented in order to build resilience at the city level. And this RFA can be incorporated into council policies, plans, programs for current and for the future budgets. And the city is excited to note that this has been quite a success, and most of our policies and programs are now in line with the resilience framework for action. It must be important to also to learn from the lessons from the CityRap process. What is for the community without the community is not for the community. That is important. This is what we learned from the processes of participatory which have been engaging during the CityRap process. Residents were saying what is for the community without the community is not for the community. Hence the need for a participatory approach. So the community was involved in mapping communities, knowing their vulnerabilities and priority requirements. They were also involved in the assessment, in the critical, what is critical for the cities, to the internal structures, towards implementing, and also there were a lot of focus groups that were internally or externally, that were also involved in the city and community mapping processes. There was also a validation workshop, which was there for all the stakeholders within the city to discuss issues to do with the resilience, to discuss issues to do with the disasters, and also to discuss issues to do with the building resilience within our cities. We also touched on issues to do on inclusivity, which is very critical and vital. We had women, we had children, we had youths, we had people living with disabilities, we had residents, we had business people. They were also involved in the CityRap process. Let's go to the next. That is the screen which shows how the mapping process, the risk mapping was done within the city of some of the vulnerable communities under the city program, which is Sakuba. That's one area which is a highly populated area called Sakuba. There is also a densely populated area called Zimta, and also an illegal settlement called Mahalape. These are the frameworks which some of the risk areas that has been done by the stakeholders during the community mapping processes. If you can move on. From the city RAP process and from the community mapping, it came out that from words and plans to action, we must not only talk, we must actually walk the talk. We should cease and stop from the habit of simply talking, but we should actually walk the talk. This is actually evidenced through the cities program when we were now introducing programs and projects that were actually being derived from the resilience framework for action. The city has enhanced its resilience activities through improved service delivery as evidenced by the provisions of solar street lighting and high mast towers in communities to enhance public safety. During the city mapping processes, it came out from the residents, mostly women and children, that there are some areas within the city that were dark, that were not light, and they were posing risks to our residents. Hence, we started now coming up with the solar projects within the city. We also improved on waste management so as to ensure that we have got a healthy community. We also started to improve more on health services, where we introduced malaria control programs. We were also very much vivid in terms of controlling the citywide COVID-19 interventions through the construction and renovation of primary health care facilities, as well as the renovation of the Mutare Infectious Disease Hospital. We also provided the clean potable water through the Tangamura pipeline project, drilling of community boreholes, supplementary water supply, and programs via Bowsers. This was actually derived from the city SRAP 2 processes through the resilience framework for action. We can move on. Pro-resilience participatory budgeting. Participatory budgeting is quite critical when we're dealing with the CITRA process. It is important that what is for the community can only engage and can only be involved if they are involved in their participating in that kind of a budget. So the state of Mutare, the privilege of coming up with what we call participatory budgeting via what we call program-based budgeting, which involved training and education of residents regarding ward-based budgeting, inclusive budgeting, incorporating input of ward development committees, participatory budgeting, capacity building initiatives, where residents were encouraged to pay up their rates on time, so that we have what we call ward retention funds that will be used to also boost projects and programs within those particular wards. We also dealt with what we call collaborative development, where the city has various memorandum of understanding with the residents' representatives, which is UMRAT, such as UMRAT regarding participatory budgeting initiatives, and also ensuring that we involve children, women, and youths in the municipal budgeting programs. Forward-looking and visionary resilience planning. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to align, to understand the alignment of all city plans within the imperatives of resilience. The new city plan, a master plan, was also effected and is now pending approval at our ministerial level. The city policies and bylaws, including climate change and environmental policies, were also adopted, wherein through the process of the city RAP program, and we were also involved in the adoption of the LEAP, which we call Local Environment Action Plans. We also instituted a water and sewage infrastructure master plan, ensuring that resources of water to meet its growth and water demands by 2030. We also set up a dedicated resilience desk within the city where residents, where key stakeholders would come and share their views, their opinion, and how we should be dealing with the resilience issues within the city. We have also developed what we call collaborative initiatives within our cities, where we visited the George municipalities, courtesy of UN Habitat in South Africa, where we also discussed at length on how to deal with the citizenship process and other resilience challenges. Gender mainstreaming was also an issue which was at this epicenter of our discussions. And critically, we also noted the need for increase and improvement of our local environments. We can move on.
We have to wrap up, Mr. Malingwa.
Yes, I think we can proceed. That is the indication which shows where we are supposed to be moving. That is also an indication where what is for us without us is not for us from the discussions which have been done. And we have been discussing, that is me and the senior government officials and also a UN Habitat official, Dave Bitamtawati, discussing about issues. Conclusion, there is a need for us to have teamwork, participation, dedication, initiative, cooperation, coordination, excellence, vision, foresight, and inclusion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Malingwa. This is really impressive work and quite impressive how you managed to put the people in front of the process, and you, yes, as a city leader, have been managing that process. So without any ado, the next speaker is Ms. Alice Russo Matsapa, Town Council Chairperson in Eswatini. Ms. Russo, can you please share and reflect on lessons from Matsapa City pioneering effort on building resilience in urban areas, innovative approaches to climate change adaptation and disaster risk management? How have partnerships between the city and the national level supported this process? Ms. Russo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As explained before, I'm standing in with Ms. Russo next to me for some reasons of alignment of element here. Just to say, the problem is we take this opportunity very serious as Matsapa. We are in an industrial town for the whole country in Swaziland. So what happens is our problem of climate risk or disaster risk issues is actually a national concern. So for us, it has been a positive thing to actually partner with the National Emergency Disaster Management Agency, because for one reason is we are solving a national problem, not a localized problem. So that will then help in terms of resources for conducting that disaster risk studies. So that is one assignment that we then had to do together with the National Disaster Management Agency. On the similar note, we have had to spearhead or be the pioneer of a project wherein the whole country has to be planting about 10 million trees in the whole country for the next 5 years. What we have done there, we had the Prime Minister to come and launch that event in our municipality, which now put us on the front side in terms of the first people, the pioneers of the event. So the whole country is going to start doing the so-called climate mitigation initiatives based on that project, because it has got the approval from the head of governance in the country. Allow me to actually also explain that we've already done about 5 more projects still coming from the similar project of disaster risk management. One of them is to look at the traffic management issues. Matsapa is about over 700 business outlets, and then it's also a national hub where we keep the fuel for the whole country in terms of the one that is used by vehicles. So what happens is we have a problem of traffic. So what we've discovered now is we have to start projects that will have to alleviate the challenge of traffic congestion in the town. Because in the case of a disaster, if you have a problem of the easy flow of traffic, and then you have a problem now that there's a disaster occurring, there could be no route of escaping if you already have a problem of traffic management. So that's one project we're already initiating. Also, we conduct a 5-year state of environment reporting, which specifically checks the quality of the air we have at the time, and so that we can be in a position to start saying, okay, now, what is the profile in terms of the atmosphere, so that we can have targeted mitigation measures, and that gives us a method of monitoring the trends. We also have a project that we are doing now that is looking at what we call waste to energy. Matsapa is one that harvests the highest quantities of waste per day in the whole country. And we have a problem of power in the country. Most of 80% of our power comes from our neighbor, South Africa. So we are now starting a project where we'll be generating energy from waste. And this project also has been pioneered by the same mitigations from the Disaster Risk Agency that we did when we started the program. We are also encouraging our industries to do what we call off-grid renewable energy plants. For example, that will offset 40% for reliance on the national grid. So we find that people will start solar generation plants within their yard. We, as a town, will be the ones that are coming to actually say, yes, this is what we are supporting, and we will support that even in the national regulator to support such initiatives. The last thing that we are doing is the country as a whole is we don't have what we call a hazardous waste management landfill or disposal site. So what happens, most of the industries in the country which we house as a municipality will be the ones that are traveling to South Africa to actually through the Basel Convention to dispose waste there. What we do as a town now, we are at advanced stage where we are building now a transfer station where everyone in the country must bring their hazardous waste into one point, so that we reduce the traffic and the traffic of moving up and down to South Africa, coming back to the country, so that it can come in one consignment. Then when it's being shipped, it's also a great, in terms of emissions, we've stopped the number of traffic cars moving up and down. Just have one consignment under one house, then you can be able to ship it in certain times. So basically, without wasting a lot of time, I will say this is the benefits that we've had. And I think this is I've just concluded. Thank you.
Thank you so much also for keeping time, to the head of the Environment Department standing for Ms. Russo. I think several challenges for the city, but I can see the proactivity in addressing them in a very sustainable way, and especially in coordination with national authorities. Let's now zoom out and see also from national authorities regarding a regional approach to urban resilience in Southern Africa, and for the 4 countries here represented in particular. The first speaker is Director Antonio Beleza, who is a Deputy Director for the Center of Emergency Operations Center in Mozambique. Mr. Beleza, the question is the following: is there a need for a regional approach, according to you, to building urban resilience? And if yes, how can this be facilitated to ensure that cities benefit from it? Or is urban resilience best left to the cities themselves? Mr. Beleza, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias, and UN Habitat for organizing this dialogue. The straight answer for your question, Matthias, is yes. I personally believe that a regional approach to urban resilience could deliver an integrated based model to support decision-making in cross-border regions facing disasters. And this is why the Southern African region faces more common challenges and vulnerability with what regards to urban resilience. Mozambique is a rural country out of 26 million population. Out of almost 26 million population, 31.9% of its population live in urban areas. The urban population is growing by 3.3% per year, while the country's overall average is 2.5. It is projected that by 2040, around 40% of the population will live in cities. The current urbanization rate is 3.8%, and the main drivers of Mozambican urbanization are natural population growth, which is 2.4, and rural urban migration, which is 1.6. The search for jobs is also a key driver of urbanization, with more young people looking for employment beyond agriculture, along with access to public services, which are mostly available in urban areas. In certain cases, security is still a factor as well. So urban areas continue to be characterized by an extensive lack of infrastructure and a public service, and the majority of residents, we're talking about 70 to 80%, continue to live in poorly serviced informal settlements. So this scenario reflects a commonality in the Southern African region, as Mozambique is not an exception. Climate change presents numerous challenges, but as well as opportunities in the urban context. The human dimensions of climate change, especially its impacts on the daily challenges of the urban poor in terms of employment, livelihoods, safety, health, housing, and access to basic service, are critical for successful policies to create inclusive and resilient cities. The current thinking of regional resilience is dominated by an isolated approach, which is based on resilience being primarily focused on isolated cities or countries, therefore neglecting critical influences of regional urban systems. So my view is that disaster management and urban resilience of cross-border regions should be interconnected to address climate change related risks and vulnerabilities in cross-border countries, adopting a holistic perspective on these vulnerabilities and their management when a disaster strikes. Recently, the southern region of Africa was hit by major cyclones, Idai and Kenneth, in such intensity never experienced before, causing one of the highest disasters in history. It is clear that a comprehensive approach to cross-border urban resilience is needed, as well as regional approach to build urban climate resilience in the most vulnerable settlements. So the relevance of this approach is already reflected through the Sub-Regional Technical Center for Disaster Risk Management, Sustainability and Urban Resilience, the DIMSUR, and its initiative is in building and strengthening urban resilience in sub-Saharan African region, which relies on an integrated approach for resilience, building the vulnerable cities. Thank you, Matthias. Over to you.
Thank you, Director Beleza. We have tried to catch up with time. I think your statement is very clear, and thank you. The next speaker is the Commissioner for Disaster Management Affairs of Malawi, Mr. James Shusiwa. James, how can the urban dimension of disaster be more sufficiently reflected in regional policy strategies and plans of action? A bit following what Director Beleza was saying. Where are, according to you, the major financing gaps for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, especially considering the urban dimension in the SADC region, and how can these be overcome through enhanced regional coordination? James, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matthias, for those two questions. In terms of the urban dimensions being reflected in regional policies and strategies, I feel that the process of ensuring that regional policies, strategies, and plans adequately reflect urban dimensions of disasters ought to start at the country level, where member states should drive this process by ensuring that they have appropriate national instruments to facilitate integration of urban dimensions of disasters. When it starts from there, then it's like it will be easy, to move it to the regional level. As a region, we have made progress in developing policy instruments to guide this process, such as the SADC Regional Resilience Framework 2020-2030, which makes deliberate effort to consider urban dimensions of resilience. This framework was approved by SADC ministers responsible for disaster risk management in February this year. I feel that what remains now is ensuring that these issues are integrated into other regional frameworks and strategies, as well as ensuring that member states align their frameworks and strategies to the regional framework. We also need to review some of the instruments and processes we use in assessing hazards, vulnerability, and disaster impacts. I have in mind the regional and national vulnerability assessment framework for food security, which is still skewed towards rural areas, when in fact food insecurity is also a problem in peri-urban areas. It is therefore high time these assessments also covered urban areas. And to go to the issue of major financing gaps for DRR and climate change adaptation, I see that a common trend among most member states in SADC is low government allocation of funds towards building resilience. So I strongly feel that we cannot make any progress if we are not able to fund resilience efforts from our own budgets as governments. So this ought to be a key focus area before we even start exploring external financing. And the other issue is the limited focus on alternative financing mechanisms. For instance, while risk transfer mechanisms exist in the region through the African Risk Capacity Initiative, very few countries have taken this path. What is even more worrying is the fact that at country level, the extent to which the insurance industry considers catastrophic insurance related to disasters is very limited, and where it exists, this has been often driven by projects and not the industry itself. So I feel that the ARC needs to do more sensitization of member states about the initiative. I think in the interest of time, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I think you are touched on very important points, especially the issue of finance. And I cannot agree more with you on the need to have a local own source financing, and of course also the insurance system to be strengthened. So without further ado, the last speaker for this session is Professor Dewald van Niekerk from Northwest University, South Africa. Dewald, it's always a pleasure to have you. The question is, how can stakeholders such as academia and academic networks support further advancing the nexus between disaster risk reduction, development, and climate change adaptation, and the development of a regional body of knowledge and expertise to tackle urban risks and to identify and implement concrete solutions? Dewald, the floor is yours.
Matthias, thank you very much. Colleagues, it's always a pleasure to be in a discussion like this. First of all, I think the resilience building and urban risk nexus is one of the most important things going into development in the future for the SADC region. It is one of those or two of those areas that brings together a multitude of various disciplines and also tries to address quite a number of common issues. Therefore, I'm quite excited that we've progressed in the past 20 years to reach a point where we can use the resilience as a focal point to bring together quite a number of different disciplines and people focusing on this real world problem that we have. That being said, what the academic research environment can do in order to support, I think there's three major points that I want to capture. The first is obviously the inherent nature of universities and research institutions. Also then the partnerships, which is very important. And the last one that I want to highlight is anticipatory governance, which is a much more broader focus. So in terms of what universities do, is obviously we do research, we do capacity development in terms of training education, we do community outreach. So what I found in the past, and DIMSA is a very good example of this, and certainly my center and a few others around SADC, is that they were born out of a common problem that we've identified, either being disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, or urban issues. And therefore the research component is very close to my heart, and I believe this is where universities can play a major role. That being said, in terms of research, we need to have a longitudinal research agenda that is driven by our member states. Researchers sit around literally looking for problems to investigate. And if we can do this through identifying real world problems, that is a multiple gain for many of us. I would like to caution about the recent trend that I've seen in the region is that there's a lot of funding for short-term projects, and that is, 2 months projects does not necessarily address the issue. And therefore, I would urge for much more longitudinal research projects. That links up with partnerships. Universities are in an ideal situation to link up multiple partners. I mean, universities have been around much longer than any government. And therefore, for public institutions, even private institutions, to work with universities will give us much more longer term gains. We can engage in mentoring and internship programs where we can also learn from industry, and we then train those cadre of students that can go into the future and occupy these positions and provide the solutions that we seek. And then lastly, in terms of anticipatory governance, I want to leave this with our urban centers. And this is a proposal to investigate how we can use this concept of anticipatory governance going into the future, which will allow us more foresight, more open-minded institutional culture. And this one, especially for Carl, is afdrachtstechniek, and that means that there's a better way of trusting people in lower ranks of government to make decisions and feed that into an academic system as well that will lead to much better problem solving. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dewald. I think there is no doubt of the important role played by the academia and the research in all of this, because we need evidence for all these strategies that were discussed and exposed both at local and national and even regional level. And I cannot agree more on the issue of anticipatory governance and the partnership building, and the fact that we should avoid depending on projects and have a more institutionalized setup. So we are getting to the conclusion of this session, and I would like to now pass the floor to Carl Dingel from the World Bank, the program manager of this initiative, for the wrap up and closing. Carl, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Matthias, for giving the floor to me for a few closing remarks. I'll work on coordinating our programs and initiatives with on disaster risk management with the regional economic communities in Africa. This morning, I won't make a big statement, nor will I speak really officially, but I just want to reflect a bit on what the different speakers, the mayors, the professors, and experts from the region have presented, and also provide a bit more background on the larger program, the ACP EU program on building disaster resilience in sub-Saharan Africa. Discussing the role of cities in response to the COVID pandemic, cities and climate change, cities and addressing disasters, I think that would request a whole conference itself. Just to reflect a bit more on what the speakers, and I think we had a number of very good reflections this morning on the work you have been doing in the region. If we look at the 470 million people who are already living in cities in Africa, and Africa as the fastest urbanizing continent, we see the urgency of addressing this issue. Southern Africa has two of the largest urban areas in the region, Kinshasa in DRC, as well as the Gauteng, meaning Pretoria, Johannesburg areas. As cities are, rapidly urbanizing, much of this is often happening as it has been discussed this morning in a bit of without proper risk-averse planning, without taking future and current risk into account. So, for example, an often phrased example, as communities are moving to the city, they are settling in areas which are at risk of flooding, essentially, wherever there's space available. At the same time, Southern Africa is also highly susceptible to the impacts of extreme climate events, in particular floods, droughts, and cyclone. And we've seen that with the cyclone Idai, which has affected the regions heavily in 2019. And yeah, we already, I think one can already see trends of increasing frequency and severity in terms of extreme weather and climate events. And nothing to mention about 2020 with the pandemic coming in with COVID. Cities were at the center of being affected. But cities are also what is also coming back in the different in the different presentations and discussion points this morning at the forefront on taking actions. I think these are the mayors, the people on the front line, city workers are directly responding to citizens, to its inhabitants on the request for better planning, addressing climate change, having more resilient development options on, and providing in this year in 2020, the frontline response to the COVID-19 pandemic and building back better. So cities in the region do also share some of those commonalities and I think it would be interesting to see how these initiatives, and I heard the colleagues speaking that there is indeed a need or some wish to have a closer regional coordination on this. With this, I think it's good to get that perspective on. And before closing, I want to get back a bit to our regional perspective to see, we've seen in the last couple of years, SADC and other partners taking really a more leading role on coordinating preparedness, coordinating disaster policies, bringing member states together. Some of this has been done through the ACP EU program that has helped SADC to work on its humanitarian and emergency operations centers, contingency planning, the disaster resilience policies. I think many of these things also have really a relevance for the cities, for the local level. So before really coming to the final close of the session, I would take the opportunity to give one or two more sentences on the program. It's an initiative of the Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, and implemented by the World Bank and GFDR. It's going on 2016 in the region. And yeah, it's part of a larger program which involves, through its what we call Result Area 2, all of the regional economic communities, ECOWAS in West Africa, ECAS in Central Africa, and IGAD in the Horn of Africa, and SADC in the south. So within the SADC region, the project supported different activities, as I said, on policy coordination, capacity building. We had a long and successful collaboration, for example, with Northwest universities in training government officials, students, early researchers on different aspects on disaster risk management. We worked on, SADC is working on its humanitarian operations center and information management platform. So all of these activities bring the disaster management policies integration a step closer. At the SADC conference in 2018, the participants expressed particularly this issue of cities, bringing them in. So I'm particularly thankful for UN Habitat's Dimsur Center to respond essentially through this project to this initiative and showing the cities in the region some of the areas, some of the avenues to take this resilience building forward. I'm quickly looking at my watch and I see we are very much close to the end of the session. So I will not elaborate much further, but I would like to thank all of the speakers this morning, the mayors, governors, the town clerks, the government colleagues, Professor Van Niekerk and others to come and share their experience. I'd like to thank the UN Habitat's Dimsur Center for organizing this session and doing the technical work behind the scenes and bringing this analytical work forward. And obviously all our nearly 50 participants who joined this session this morning, a big thank you for joining in. And with that, I think I'm taking the opportunity to officially wrap it up here with. Thank everyone for zooming in this morning. And if you stay on, there are a couple of other interesting sessions on the UR forum this morning. I think today is the last day of the UR conference, so don't hesitate to join one of the other discussions. And thanks everyone for joining the sessions. And over to you. I'll have to apologize as I have to run away to another session. But again, thanks, and let me herewith pass it back for on the closing of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Carl. No, I think we are wrapping up, so we are just in time. I really thank for your words and also for the support of the World Bank in this important initiative. Thank you all for listening, and hopefully we will follow up this discussion for the next years to come. Thank you all.